Perak Yotes begins, B'chodesh Hashlishi, the third month, Lotzeis B'nei Yisrael Me'eretz Mitzrayim, from the time that the Jewish people left the land of Mitzrayim. Third month, because we always count Nisan as month number 1 in the Torah, Nisan Iyar Sivan. Vayom hazeh bo'u midbar Sinai. On that day, they came to Midbar Sinai. In other words, the Torah is telling me, when did they arrive at the foot of Mount Sinai? Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Vayom hazeh, on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. They got the Torah, they got the 10 Commandments a week later, on the 6th of Sivan, which is the holiday of Shavuot, according to one opinion, actually on the 7th of Sivan. And I will discuss at a much later date the interesting problem that if you follow the view of the Tanaim, that the 10 Commandments were given on the 7th of Sivan, why do we celebrate Shavuos the wrong day? In other words, nobody's arguing about Shavuos. Shavuos is when Shavuos is, but the machlokas is, did we get the 10 Commandments on the 6th of Sivan? Or did we get the 10 Commandments on the 7th of Sivan? Now, if we got the 10 Commandments on the 6th of Sivan, we are celebrating Shavuos on the day that we got the 10 Commandments, which is what we've told all of our children throughout their lives. But if you hold that we got the 10 Commandments on the 7th of Sivan, we are actually celebrating Shavuos on the day that we didn't get the 10 Commandments. So what is it that we are celebrating? Okay, I'll let you cogitate over that question until Shavuos, and then we'll get to it. We'll get to it later in the year. But be it as it may, l'chulei alma, whether the 10 Commandments were the 6th or the 7th, we got to Midbar Sinai on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Okay, good. That's Pasuk Aleph. Pasuk Beis then says, Vayisu mir Rephidim. It seems to be going backwards. We're already talking, they arrived at Midbar Sinai. Pasuk Beis says, Vayisu mir Rephidim. They journeyed from Rephidim. Well, we know that. We know Rephidim was the stop before Sinai, because that's where Amalek attacked us, you'll recall, in the end of Beshalach. So why repeat the information that we know from the end of Beshalach? And then it says, Vayavo Midbar Sinai. And they came to Midbar Sinai. But I know that also. That's what Pasuk Aleph said. And then it says, yet again, Vayachanu b'midbar, and they encamped in the midbar. Well, if they came there, that's what they would do. And then it repeats yet again, Vayichan sham Yisrael neged har. So the problem basically is, Pasuk Beis is absolutely redundant. There is not a single bit of new information that you directly get from Pasuk Beis. The end of Beshalach already told me they left Rephidim. Pasuk Aleph tells me they came to Midbar Sinai, Rosh Chodesh Sivan. So why do I need Pasuk Beis to then say they left Rephidim, they came to Midbar Sinai, they encamped in the desert, and then it repeats again, Vayichan neged har. They encamped next to the mountain. So there's a very, very beautiful pshat from the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. The Or HaChaim is, of course, Rav Chaim Ben Attar, great a gadol from Morocco who came to Yerushalayim. He's buried on Har HaZeisim, and his yahrzeit is actually still attracts thousands of people. It's in Tammuz, thousands of people to the Har HaZeisim, and he's one of the relatively few. Yeah, which one? Right, Tetzvav Tammuz, right, and he's one of the relatively few meforshim that we still use, call the appellation Kadosh or HaChaim HaKadosh, you'll often say. And he says the following. He says, the purpose of Pasuk Beis, this is Perak Yotes Pasuk Beis, is not to discuss the geographical movement of the Jewish people. We already know they left Rephidim and came to Har Sinai. But it's discussing the spiritual journey the Jewish people had to take before they became worthy of Matan Torah. And he divides Pasuk Beis into a nice 4-step plan. There are 4 steps we must take in order to be worthy of receiving God's Torah. Now, of course, these 4 steps are much easier said than actually done, but he gives you a very easy to state, at least, 4-step plan. Step number 1, you must travel from the place called Rephidim. Now, we know Rephidim is an oasis. We know Rephidim is where Amalek attacked us. But Chazal say Rephidim is also a symbolic name. Rephidim is an abbreviation or an acronym for the phrase Rafu Yadayim. Their hands were loose, their grasp was weak. And this refers to the idea that there's a fundamental concept that Amalek has power over us only when there is some type of flaw within us that makes us vulnerable to Amalek. In fact, the mitzvah of the Torah, eradicate Amalek, is not only referring to the external Amalek, but it refers to characteristics within us that make us vulnerable to Amalek. That is how we fulfill Mechiat Amalek. And Chazal say, what made the Jewish people vulnerable to Amalek, at least in part, was the idea of Rafu Rephidim. Rafu Yedehem Min HaTorah. Now, what does that mean? This is an idiom. When you care about somebody, let's say you're carrying your baby across Emek Rephaim, so you're going to hold your baby very, very tight. So the more you care about something or someone, the tighter you hold on to them. When you don't care about something that much, your grasp might be very, very loose. You don't even know it's in your hand. You may drop it. It makes no difference. So the phrase Rifyon Yadayim refers to a certain attitude that a person has towards religion, towards spirituality, towards Torah. And that is, even if a person keeps the Torah and the mitzvot, they might do so with coldness, with indifference, with complacency, with boredom, with a lack of excitement, as we say in Yiddish, a lack of geschmack. That is the attitude of Rifyon Yadayim. And when there is Rifyon Yadayim, we become vulnerable to Amalek. And that is what the Torah means when it says, Vayisu mirfidim. If you want to accept Hashem's Torah, you must leave complacency, indifference, boredom. And we must try to inculcate within ourselves and within our personalities a notion of simcha, excitement in Avodas Hashem. Now this is indeed a very, very significant challenge. Because even if a person keeps the mitzvot, a person merits to, of course, let me be the first to say, better to keep the mitzvot in a complacent, non-committed way than not to do it at all. Meaning, no one is saying, don't do the mitzvot unless you can do them at the highest possible level. But still, all of us are prone to the idea that our Avodat Hashem can sometimes become very sterile, atrophied, dry, fossilized, petrified, etched in stone. Because, and of course, the mitzvahs are etched in stone, but our hearts should not be etched in stone. And in many ways, this is what Chassidus came to bring back to Klal Yisrael, much more of an emphasis on the enthusiasm and excitement of Avodat Hashem. And the Orach Chaim writes, Vayisu mirfidim. You have to leave Rephidim, leave the Rifyon Yadayim, to truly receive God's Torah. Now the emes is, the great Rav Tzadok, who lived much later, Rav Tzadok, a great Hasidic Rebbe, makes the same point but from a different phrase, not from Rephidim, but in Parshat Ki Seitze, where the Torah reviews what Amalek did to us. There's a phrase, Asher Korcha Baderech, which in English is translated, Amalek encountered you in the way. But Rashi brings a medrash that Korcha can also mean made you cold, Karcha, made you cold. And the mashal that Rashi brings is, when the Jewish people left Mitzrayim, the whole world was afraid of them. The whole world was afraid of them. There were 10 plagues and Kriyas Yamsuf. You don't mess with the Jews. Bad things happen to you if you mess with the Jews. They were like a boiling, scalding hot bath. Nobody would even touch it. They wouldn't put their finger in it. Amalek was the very first nation that jumped into a boiling, scalding hot bath. Understandably, they got burnt. But they made it less hot for the next guy, because once they broke the aura of invincibility, It made it more possible for someone else to take the next step. In other words, the attitude is, oh, well, they attacked the Jews. They didn't win, but at least they attacked them. Maybe we can do it as well. So that's the meaning, Amalek made you cold. That's what Rashi says. Rav Tzadok goes with the same etymology, made you cold, but he runs with it in a different way. That Amalek represents a coldness of the heart. That when your heart is cold in Avodas Hashem, then you become vulnerable to Amalek. So the same thing that Chazal saw in the word Rephidim, Rav Tzadok reads into Asher Korcha Baderech. Of course, it's interesting. I may have mentioned this story before, that I always have a feeling that Rav Tzadok is being a bit autobiographical here. Rav Tzadok was not born into a Hasidic family. Rav Tzadok was born as a Misnagate, and he was a very, very brilliant person. He knew Shas and Poskim at a very, very young age. And when he was in his early 20s, he had occasion to travel, and he met one of the Hasidic Rebbes, the Ishbitzer, who was later popularized by Shlomo Karlbach, but the Ishbitzer was actually Rav Tzadok's Rebbe. It was a divorce. Yeah, it's all a very interesting, tragic story. Rav Tzadok demanded a divorce from his wife because he thought she shook someone's hand in a store, whatever it is. So he was very, very kanoi in those things. And she refused, so he was trying to get a heter of Meir Rabbanim, of 100 Rabbanim, to allow him to divorce her without her consent. And as a result, this young genius had occasion to meet many, many people in Europe, and he became a chassid. I just want to say, I don't want to be marich on this story so much. I just want to say that Rav Tzadok was married twice after that. He was a widower, and then he married a third time. He had no children from any of his marriages, and he said at the end of his life that it's because of the harsh way that he treated his first wife, not in a proper way, that Hashem punished him. And again, if you read Rav Tzadok, you can actually sense how painful it was that he did not have children. It was not just, it's hard for everybody, but there was a certain whole spiritual dimension that he saw in this. And he said it was because of the way he treated her, and he had a very, very deep, deep regret. She did marry, and she did have a family. He was not so. But be it as it may, he did become a chassid as a result. And the story goes that he went to the Ishbitzer, he didn't know who the Ishbitzer was. He just went to hear a Suda Shlishis drasha. And the Ishbitzer was giving a drasha, and in the middle, Rav Tzadok had, to borrow a Christian term, he had an epiphany. And in the middle, he started crying. He said, "My heart is on fire." And then he started clasping his head, and he says, "All I was a brain, but I want to be a person. I don't want to just be a brain." And he totally changed. He still became, obviously, as a cerebral, enormous Talmid Chacham, he remained the enormous Talmid Chacham that he was. But he understood very much the idea that a person could be so enwrapped sometimes in mental operations that one loses sight of the greater, more important goal of connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And thus he spoke about the idea of Amalek being connected to the coldness of the heart. That one has to have a warm heart, one has to be filled with passion. Avas Hashem, Yiras Hashem. And without trying to fully address a very complicated phenomenon, part of the issue, there are many, many reasons, but part of the issue of the kids at risk phenomenon that the Orthodox world has become more aware of children going off the derech. There are many, many, many reasons, and some are really not even reasons. Things just happen. We can't always give a reason for anything. But part of it is that if the Yiddishkeit in the home or in the school, or the yeshiva, is not conveyed with a warmth and with a joy, if it's conveyed as a burdensome sense of things you can't do, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and all you're doing is taking things away one after another, but there's no sense of the simcha in serving Hashem, then at some point a person might rebel and say, who needs it? I don't want it anymore. Right? So the issue of, this is what we call in the industry, just like we talk about kiruv rechokim, drawing people who are far from Hashem back to mitzvos. There's also a need for kiruv krovim, even people who are absolutely religious and observant. We all need kind of a jump start into embrace Judaism with joy and excitement and the like. Now again, this is the whole conflict, because obviously sometimes there's a pendulum here. When you emphasize the subjective religious experience of joy, you sometimes become less conscientious in halacha, which is also a mistake. When you emphasize the meticulous following of the rules, you sometimes leave the realm of joy and simcha. So, as is always the case, the truth is somewhere in the middle, in which you have to embrace both of those ideas. But at least Rephidim, the Orach Chaim says, is leave Rephidim, leave complacency. Embrace the Torah, embrace Hashem with passion. In fact, here the Baal HaTanya makes a very, very interesting point. The Baal HaTanya writes there's a difference. He uses two words. Again, the way he uses the words is a bit idiosyncratic. But he uses two different words for a certain sadness in serving God. One is a good sadness, and one is a bad sadness. One term he uses is merirus, the bitterness of spirit, in which I feel pain that I am separated from God. That's called merirus. And the other is called atzvus. Atzvus, which literally means sadness, is the insensitivity of not feeling anything, like a dead stone. So the Baal HaTanya writes, although dominantly one's attitude should be simcha, but it is appropriate at different times of day to feel a yearning and a sadness that you're not close to God. But that yearning and sadness is very much alive. It is a feeling. It is a striving. It is a yearning in which you cry out to Hashem, I want to be connected to you. He says that is healthy and that is necessary, because that expresses the yearnings of a soul that wants to grow. And although if you have too much of that, you get depressed and sad, and that's not good, and therefore you need to have simcha most of the time. But there are times, of course it's always amazing, in the Tanya, he seems to always be describing, you could turn your emotions on and off like a faucet, like 15 minutes a day, you're supposed to be sad and you cry to Hashem, and then the rest of the day you be happy. Most of us can't really work on that particular level. But he says, that's merirus. Merirus is a sadness that's alive. It's like a living thing. I want to be connected. But then there's another type of sadness, which is a deadening kind of a weight in which you just don't feel. He says that is not good, because that does not lead you to connect to Hashem. That just causes you to fall deeper and deeper and deeper. So leaving Rephidim is to embrace with love and with fear and with joy and with enthusiasm and with passion Avodas Hashem.